Welcome, scholars! This presentation is titled Introduction to Single-Case Experimental Design. Other terminology used to describe this methodology includes single-subject research or N-of-1 research. Throughout the presentation, I will use terminology interchangeably. Right off the top, let's address one common misconception. N-of-1 or single-case research does not mean that we conduct research with only one participant. The term case can refer to a single individual or a group of individuals from whom we take repeated measurements of operationally defined behavior. In a nutshell, the terms single subject or N-of-1 simply refer to the fact that we focus our analysis on data from an individual case, which may in fact be a group of participants. Regardless of the terminology used, single case designs are particularly useful for those working in clinical or school settings across a variety of disciplines. In this presentation, the objective is to introduce the logic and foundations of single subject experimental designs used in intervention research. During the recorded presentation, I will use or try to use language that conforms to APA style. For example, I will use data as a plural noun. This sounds like the data are stable rather than the data is accelerating in the direction of improvement. I will use they as a singular and plural pronoun. For example, I might say each serves as their own control. Finally, person-first language will be the default. For example, participants included 3 students with intellectual disability. Identity-first language will be used in direct quotes from individuals who express this as a preference. Scholars begin this course with a variety of experiences and knowledge related to conducting and interpreting applied research. Some of you are familiar with qualitative methods, others with quantitative, and others still with mixed methods. Perhaps you have conducted a study where you disseminated Likert-style surveys and your purpose was to describe perceptions. Perhaps you conducted a study where you sought to establish a correlation, or perhaps you've conducted a case study where you followed the tradition of providing narrative description of cases and outcomes. However, in this course, we will focus on experimental research. In particular, single-case experimental research, a valid and yet often misunderstood form of experimental research. The purpose in single-case research, like in conducting randomized control trials, is to document causal relationships. In single-subject experimental research, researchers control for major threats to internal validity. And they document effects for specific individuals, also called cases or systems. Finally, replication is a hallmark in single-case research. Our focus in single-subject research is on the individual case or system, and we often seek to generalize our findings to specific individuals rather than broader, larger, randomly selected groups. Replication, or repeating our effects across individual cases and settings, enhances external validity. So let's rephrase and summarize. 1, single-case research is not a fancy or glorified way of conducting case study research. Single-subject research is experimental research. That is, single-case researchers make causal inferences, or in the language of applied behavior analysis, establish functional relations between the introduction of an independent variable and change in the dependent variable. Single subject design or N-of-1 research does not mean that we include only one participant in our study. It means that we analyze data for individual cases through repeated measurement so that we can see variation and change. When you are working with a low incidence population and you are interested in the pattern or trajectory of acquisition or change, then single subject experimental design is an optimal choice. Indeed, single subject experimental designs allow for fine-grained analysis of unique patterns of response. Single case designs have been recommended as a best practices strategy for teacher researchers or scientist practitioners in applied and clinical settings. Within the fields of occupational therapy, physical therapy, special education, speech-language pathology, and counseling, there is an increased demand for educators and allied health professionals to be accountable for the outcomes of the therapeutic and instructional strategies they use in direct service. Another rationale for using single subject experimental design is that it is a forgiving and self-correcting method in the sense that we can change something about our intervention or treatment when it does not produce patterns of change in the direction of improvement. We can make and document changes right then and there. We don't have to wait for post-test data to be collected at the end of an experiment to make that change. Let's explore principles that lie at the foundation of single subject experimental research. In single case research, we analyze data at the level of the individual case, where each case, which can be an individual or group, serves as their own control. That is, we are more interested in how George responds to a treatment than we are in comparing George's responses with Paul's responses. Baseline logic is a distinguishing feature of single case research where we repeatedly measure behavior. We assume that there will be variability from day to day, and rather than trying to eliminate it statistically, we are interested in seeing what it looks like. We assume that without intervention, the behavior will reach a steady state and that we will be able to detect trends so that we can predict with some accuracy where the next data point will fall. When you predict with great accuracy, then you are ready to stop collecting baseline data for that particular case and begin implementing the intervention. In single case research, we repeatedly measure behavior over adjacent conditions, baseline intervention, and in so doing, we can verify the effect of an intervention. However, we are not interested in one-time effects. We want robust effects where we can be sure of producing a certain effect. Because of this, we use single case designs that allow us the potential to demonstrate replication of effect within subjects, also called direct intra-participant replication, and across subjects or cases, also called inter-participant direct replication. Replication ensures that there is not some idiosyncratic effect for one subject or case. In single case research, we repeatedly measure behavior and graph our data over at least two adjacent conditions. Cases or systems serve as their own control. Researchers repeatedly measure behavior and they achieve stability in baseline to be able to predict the next data point before intervening. Then they make comparisons between adjacent conditions, A to B, baseline to intervention, to verify the effect. Finally, they replicate the effect. The main goal of single subject research is to determine whether a functional relation exists between the introduction of the independent variable and the change in the dependent variable. A functional relation requires 3 demonstrations of effect at 3 different points in time. In single subject research, we refer to the cause-effect relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable as a functional relation. On the slide is an AB-AB design, also called a reversal, withdrawal, operant, or equivalent time series design, where the percentage of off-task behavior stabilizes at a high level in baseline. Upon introduction of the treatment, The level shifts, indicating on-task behavior. This is one demonstration of effect. The second demonstration occurs when the treatment is faded and behaviors return to a high level of off-task behavior in the baseline. The third demonstration replicates the treatment effect. We have 3 demonstrations of effect at 3 different points in time. One major task that we accept as single case researchers is operationally defining behavior. As scholars in this course from a variety of disciplines, how sharp are your skills when it comes to operationally defining behavior? Sort the examples and non-examples of operationally defined behavior. Read aloud a 200-word passage. Stay on task during math class. Retell the narrative sequence using 4 elements in somebody, wanted, but, so, then. Throw a tantrum. Perform warm-up and fitness training of static cycling and treadmill walking for 10 minutes at up to 70% of maximal heart rate. Throwing a tantrum and staying on task are vague and subjective. Meanwhile, the 3 remaining can be seen, heard, counted, repeated, and rated with a fair amount of consistency across observers. Another feature of single-case research is the active manipulation of the independent variable. We, as researchers in occupational therapy, physical therapy, communication science and disorders, special education, kinesiology, social work, school psychology, and counseling psychology, take into account the needs and resources of our clients, students, or consumers when we select our independent variables. We care about what's socially significant and whether our participants share and see value in the goals of our intervention. We want our interventions to be acceptable and to produce results that satisfy participants. Experimental control, or the ability to state a cause-effect relationship between the introduction of the independent variable and change in the dependent variable, is part of single-case research. What we are after here is 3 demonstrations of effect at 3 different points in time. We control for threats to internal validity and demonstrate direct intra-subject replication. We demonstrate external validity through inter-subject direct replication. We measure social acceptability by evaluating perceptions of the goals, procedures, and outcomes of this study. We graph our data, and we visually analyze data on dimensions of predicted change. We can, and sometimes do, use statistical techniques in our data analysis, but visual analysis is always possible by interpreting the level, trend, and variability within conditions, as well as the immediacy of effect, overlap, and consistency between and across phases. Pause to check your understanding by finding 2 truths and a lie. 1, single subject, n equals 1. Single case design research means that we include only 1 participant in the study. 2, single case design is a valid and robust form of experimental research that allows for causal inferences to be established. 3, I, meaning you, can explain the rationale for conducting single subject research to evaluate an intervention. What types of research questions do we investigate through single case design? Content acknowledgement to Dr. Tom Cradwell. A research question might evaluate intervention effects relative to baseline performance levels. For example, does multi-systemic therapy reduce the level of problem behavior for students with emotional behavior disorders? We might compare relative effectiveness of 2 or more interventions. For example, is function-based behavior support more effective than non-function-based support at reducing the level and variability of problem behavior for this participant? 3, we might compare single and multi-component interventions. For example, does adding performance feedback to basic teacher training improve the fidelity with which instructional skills are used by new teachers in the classroom? What kinds of interventions are you interested in evaluating? Reflect on what you know now in relation to the session objective. Introduce the logic and foundations of single-case experimental designs in intervention research. Behold the beauty of single-case design, scholars, until we meet again.